let's be humble, one of the most important think tank in Spain, surely the most influencing one. FAES is chaired by the former Prime Minister José María Aznar and is a think tank committed to the defense of freedom in all its expressions. FAES was invited to chair this roundtable, and we are
do populist parties reflect? And in my view, the economic crisis just catalyzed the emergence or the reinforcement of populist parties, but what lies more behind them are more deep-rooted reasons, which have existed for a long time. And basically, what I would summarize this in is a crisis of representation. Okay? There's a sense of people in Europe that they are not represented by their political elites, they're not represented by their member states. They see that their member states are not strong enough to perform or to deliver things for them. They see that the EU, which in theory would be expected to supplant the member state, the nation state, in some cases does not perform either. Another reaction that populist parties represent is the idea of depoliticization. And this has to do with the fact that for many years, both the center-right and the center-left were seen as basically being identical. And this has created the idea that in hard times, when you really need an alternative, you have to look for it outside of the mainstream. Now, the good news is that in some of those countries, you see that the demand for better political representation, for a new way of doing politics, does not necessarily lead to the rise of anti-European forces. You have the example of Ciudadanos in Spain, or you have the example of Topotami in Greece. These are parties that respond to the need for a new way of doing politics, and they don't necessarily take an anti-European agenda. They don't necessarily overtake an idea of a European agenda. So my main argument, and coming back to the point of political reforms, is that economic crisis is a way of magnifying pre-existing threats to our democratic systems, basically magnifying pre-existing sense among the people that for long their political elites don't work for them. But at the same time, this, in my view, also showcases that there is an opportunity. And the opportunity is that there has to be a way for, if courageous political decisions are taken, maybe the reaction to the costs of economic reforms may be counterbalanced. And what I have in mind here is, for example, what is happening in Italy, where Matteo Renzi is putting forward a reform package of political institutions. The Italian political system is notoriously dysfunctional for a long time. He's putting it to a referendum. I'm not sure this is a brilliant idea. But still, what is interesting is that he chooses the path of political reform as a way to support an overall agenda of reform of the Italian state, which, of course, includes the economy. Another point which was raised by the previous, I think by Nico particularly, is that in Europe today, the public sphere is integrated. Okay? It's what happens in one member state affects the political fortunes of political parties in other member states. So, since it's, well, this is the topic of, this is a panel of Faez, and I am Greek, so it's kind of like a southern panel, if you will. I would like to be a bit provocative in the sense that political courage is needed, but political courage is needed among all sides. Okay? Political courage is needed for reforms, but if we claim to be Europeans, and if we claim to speak about, if we claim to represent solidarity, a specific version of solidarity, not probably not a leftist version of solidarity, but still a certain kind of solidarity, political courage, you need political courage for reform in troubled countries, but you need political courage for leadership in countries that are meant to lead. For example, I'm thinking about the intermittent discussion about the question of the Greek debt, which has been going on since 2012 to 2013. And in some ways, the reactions of various actors to the question of the Greek debt in Northern Europe has not served the previous government, which was pro-European and pro-reform in Greece, and is also not serving the cause of reforms today in Greece. So I would say courage for reforms, yes, but in an ever integrated and ever unified European political space, you need courage for leadership. As well. I was going to talk actually about the fiscal capacity and the fiscal instrument myself. One point, though, to be absolutely just to talk about it, I think the fiscal capacity is the missing link in how economic crisis is dealt with in Europe. If you look at other countries, US, Japan, other political systems, what they have that Europe does not have is a deliberate fiscal capacity. That is clear. But we should also know that if we make this step, we should be ready to accept that this fiscal capacity is going to be a politicized, contested issue on a pan-European level. Okay? The main, the touchstone of political debate is how do you spend our money? And if this question happens on a European level, we should be ready to, and I think that we should also be willing to invite a political discussion that will take place on a European level about how this money is going to be spent. So this is for now.
Thank you very much, Angelos. Okay, I think the debate will serve. We have been speaking about fiscal capacity. We have been speaking about the decision-taking process in the European Union. And we have been speaking now, Angelos, about the crisis of representation that a lot of European people, European citizens, is feeling now. So it's your time. It's you can make your question whatever you want. There is the microphone. Here,
yes, my name is David Price. I write on the Schuman project on the origin, purpose and future of the community system. So I'd like to open up the debate a little bit, but using the theme that Siegfried mentioned of investment. Investment depends, it seems to me, on a good, solid monetary system. And I don't know how many of those are here, but remember the debates of the 1990s about the faults of the coming monetary system. And now, rather than going to the history of that, I'd like to just point to a trend which is going to test the faults which were exposed in that period. And that is to do with what was a cartel agreement between OPEC and the dollar, that all oil should be made in dollars. And now we see that Iran is wanting to sell its oil in euros. Now, this may be seen to be a good thing for Europe, but on the other hand, it will move a lot of world trade out of the dollar, put a huge amount of pressure on the 19 trillion debt of the dollar system, and then we will have pressure on the European system. So we need to have a solid European system which is flexible but strong. You know, two things. What we've got is a Eurozone which is inflexible at the moment, and that was pointed out, as I say, in the early debates. So we may be heading for, we're not just talking about fiscal capacities, but we're talking about something which we need to strengthen the whole European system before we can even get into the debate properly. The Iranians, for example, are insisting in their contracts that the oil should be sold in euros or in gold. And that gets back to a lot of other debates. So I just want to throw those questions out, because I think we may be heading for a crisis which is even bigger than the Wall Street crisis.
Okay, thank you. We can accumulate 2 or 3 questions. Okay.
I was surprised that none of the speakers mentioned what I consider the most serious problem, the high unemployment, especially the youth unemployment. The words didn't even fall. I don't see the reason why we need a fiscal capacity for the Eurozone, which is only half of or 2/3 of member states.
Okay, I think you have also question. With these 3 questions we can, okay.
Thanks. Oksana Has from Ukrainian think tank's office. My question is to Nico Lange. When you elaborated on root causes of European crisis, you were addressing in the first line internal problems. What about external causes and solutions for that?
Okay. I think you can start because the first question was for you, well, for all the panel. But
I'm happy to take the blame. So basically, every time when I said jobs, I refer to unemployment because creating jobs means reducing unemployment. And what I truly believe in is the following. What we need is real employment policies, not only social policies. Because, as I said in the beginning, my belief is that jobs are being primarily created by the private sector, and our duty is to put forward a framework which the private sector trusts, which it has confidence in, so that it can invest, generate growth, create jobs, which reduces unemployment. And here comes the difference between us and the left, because I believe no matter how many social products we create, or no matter how many programs to reduce youth unemployment from the EU budget we create, unless the private sector trusts the economy and invests and the economy is competitive, you will not have stable long-term jobs. And we're witnessing this with the budget of the European Union, where we said reducing youth unemployment is a key priority for us, correct. We allocate EU funds for it, correct. But we see that through these types of social projects, hardly any sustainable, long-term, well-paid jobs are being created. What is being created is short-term jobs or internships or additional trainings, because jobs can only be created at the end of the day by the private sector if it feels that the economy is strong, if there is global demand for the goods which we produce here. So the best thing which I believe we can do for reducing unemployment is, putting forward an economic framework which the private sector can invest in. Just briefly, because you also touched upon when you said, fiscal capacity for the Eurozone, but by the way, that's only half of the Euro area. Well, yes, the good thing is the following. The good thing is that the Euro area has continued to expand throughout the difficult economic years of the crisis. So the Euro, in that sense, is still an attractive and a trustworthy tool for the countries which, by the way, they made efforts to join. Latvia, Lithuania, just to mention the last two of 2014 and 2015, which joined. So in the long term, except the United Kingdom and Denmark, who have opt-outs, of course, all members of the European Union should join. And by the way, this was also the thinking behind the budget of the European Union for the past decades. We want to use the EU funds to improve convergence within the EU, to also make those countries who are less developed, who are not yet members of the European Union, to help them converge and to make it able for them to join the monetary zone. So my take on this is the following. I believe that it's good for all of the countries which are yet outside of the Eurozone to join all projects of further economic integration, and this already happened throughout the crisis. Many countries outside the Eurozone joined the fiscal compact, which limits deficits and public debt at European level, and which is a good thing for them if they also sign up to not spending more of people's money. The Euro Plus Pact, which was created to improve productivity, competitiveness, labor markets in Europe. And so on. That's why also for the fiscal capacity, my take is that those countries which make efforts and plan to join the euro in the foreseeable future should be given the option to join the fiscal capacity in terms of contributions, benefits, and governance. And with this, with governance, I will finish in the sense that it was touched here. I believe governance is important, but what I believe is more important now is the effect of the decisions which we make upon the real economy. So the fact that we are just having a new type of governance in Brussels does not necessarily lead to to improvements of the real economy. And by the way, people in the member states, they look at us and they are not interested in how we organize ourselves in Brussels. Parliament, Council, Commission, how you adopt the budget and so on. What people are interested in is, what we do to improve their lives at the end of the day. And that's why I say governance, yes, it's important, but more important is what is the immediate effect upon the economy for SMEs, for entrepreneurs, for people who are still looking for a job, of the measures which we are taking. And that's why I believe that reforms are important at the end of the day.
Okay. Do you want to say something about the economy, or Nico can answer the third question? Nico?
Just continuing on what you just said, I think this is it's one of the key issues on the communicative level. If the people have the feeling that the European Union is not improving their lives, to put it very simply, then we see reactions, as we see now in many countries of the European Union, making a discourse on further European integration very difficult. Why is the communicative aspect is, I think, important, because my impression is, coming from a more national perspective on things, naturally, since I came here from Berlin, is that this has been communicated during the crisis over the last years many times, that people, for several reasons in several countries of the European Union, have the feeling the European Union is not improving our lives. But the communication that came back from the European Union was not, yes, we have understood and we will try to do things differently now. The communication that was received very much was, we will try to meddle through, to do more of the same. And I think that's something very important about the reform discourse to take into account. About the external causes of the crisis, I mean, one could very well say that the challenges the European Union is facing, the debt crisis in the Eurozone, the Russian attack on Ukraine, the influx of refugees, they are all just highlighting the same issue. It's questioning, or it's showing us that the capacity of the European Union to act in such situations and to have meaningful and necessarily quick decisions taken to counter those crises is not very well developed. So maybe it's just several expressions of one and the same crisis of the European institutions, and this, I think, needs to be addressed in an institutional manner. And it leads me back to my question: who is now the instance to make a meaningful proposal on institutional reforms of the European Union? And it maybe reflects back to the role that we as think tanks are playing, because I sat at an amazing amount of events like this, where necessarily somebody says the European Union needs a new narrative, or where somebody says a new narrative. We need to, or where we express our not very good feelings about not having concrete reform proposals on the table. So I think the message back to the think tanks would be: let's not demand new narratives, but at least have some ideas of concrete narratives that we are telling. I think Siegfried offered one about competitiveness and creating an environment for successful business. Let's have concrete proposals for institutional reforms. I tried to lay out one of them. There might be others, but I think this kind of discussion is needed.
Just actually to answer to also follow up on the question, because you said you're from Ukraine, and for me it was interesting because I actually was in Ukraine. I was in Lviv the day after the Dutch referendum on Ukraine, and I was walking in Lviv and I was thinking how bizarre that all of these people's lives here are affected by 60% of 30% of the electorate of a country that has 2% of the EU population. I found that absolutely bizarre, and as you might know, of course, the EU referendum the Ukraine referendum in the Netherlands basically was completely hijacked by populist anti-European parties that just picked up on this one issue and they decided to make run for it, to make a point about the EU. But what is also interesting is that, coming back to my point about political reforms, I want to bring people closer to our political systems and to make our political systems more responsive to what the people want. When you design new ways of integrating people into the decision-making process, you better be darn smart about how you design this thing, unless you actually make what instrument is supposed to be the way to integrate the people into the decision-making process. You just make it a vehicle for a mobilized minority to basically hold hostage the EU and one of its most important partners in its periphery. So smart design of issues like this Dutch referendum, I'm sure Dutch politicians are probably thinking now, because now they're thinking about starting the same initiative to have a referendum on the Transatlantic Trade Pact in the Netherlands. So not a very brilliant thing that was happening in the Netherlands right now. I would like to react a bit also to what Siegfried said, and also concerning the word narrative. A few words actually make me more allergic. And whenever I hear the word narrative coming up, it just feels, it's just an easy way of saying something needs to be done. What I find, I don't want to be too academic, but I found an interesting. I heard you speaking a lot about the word governance in the EU, and of governance. The notion of governance is that things happen in a complex political system, and of course the EU is a complex political system. But in most of the relevant literature, a main point of contention is how do you control governance, or where do people find access into governance to control governance. Governance is basically a fancy way of saying that you don't have government. Government is something that is political, that people can relate to, that people can vote in, can vote out, that they know who is responsible for what. And that is why the nation state still carries, in my view, such a major attraction for people's political allegiance. It's just smarter to keep track of who your leaders are or what you can do with them. If you have governance, you actually don't know who does what. So when we speak about better governance in the EU, I think we should be very much aware, and also going back to my point that the rise of populist parties is primarily a political reaction and a reaction to a sense of non-representation. I think we should be very careful to just think that governance is a narrative that solves all problems. And then the other thing, again, I would like to challenge Siegfried, is he started by saying there is no magic bullet for our problems. But then, I don't want to misquote him, but for argument's sake, it seemed to be that in his last statement, he seemed to say that if the economic climate improves, then things are going to be better politically. I mean, that makes sense. But again, reaction to a sense of political alienation is not necessarily related to so populist parties have been around, and they have been doing well during better economic times than now. Jean-Marie Le Pen made it to the second round of the French elections when the political situation in France was much better than today, and so on and so forth. So going back to the whole governance point and the political reform, I don't think that we should hedge our bets on the improvement of the economic climate to take us out of political predicaments. If anything, as politicians and as political systems, we have more control over political reforms and political developments than what we do over economic developments. In a free market, you cannot just make the economy go better. So I think we should be very careful in just thinking that improvement of the economic climate, whenever that may happen, leads to improvement of the political climate.
Thank you. Okay, Nico.
I just wanted to come in quickly on the representation issues, since you mentioned it several times. I know that political scientists love this discussion about participation and wanted to offer a different perspective. Sure. Because my impression is that on the political level and also looking at national parties, those who are demanding more participation in decision-making in the European Union actually mean that they want more special rights for themselves. And I'm oversimplifying this, But it seems to me the European Union is much more measured in the eyes of the citizens by what works, and not if the most possible amount of interested parties was part of this decision and all positions were taken into account. That's why I'm saying the Eurozone countries should find ways of deciding the monetary issues in the Eurozone among themselves, and it's will be measured by if it works and brings stability to the Eurozone, and that will create acceptance with the citizens. And it's not so important, I think, in the eyes of the citizens, if everybody possible was part of the decision-making stabilizing the Eurozone.
I remember when I was once in a campaign managers meeting of the European People's Party, I was invited, and I remember there was a lot of talk about strengthening the impact of strengthening the participation of young people, and maybe we should be hosting elections on a different day than on a Sunday or something. There was some interesting discussion, and then someone from the table said, in my country, young people don't tend to vote for my party, so I don't see why I should make anything to make young people turn out in elections more. So, that happened. When I was still a naive political scientist, and I thought to myself, well, that's a nice insight into how professionals of politics think. Even if I would accept what you said, and it's the whole debate about input and output legitimacy of the EU, I would maybe say that even if what you said is correct, there is just one caveat in my mind. Perhaps for a political system that performs well does not need that much of does not require political legitimacy for people to be happy with it if it performs well. A political system that does not perform well and does not have political legitimacy either is a time bomb.
Let's strengthen performance then.
Okay. And then Siegfried, and then we pass to David. Okay.
Briefly, 2 points from my side, because in his previous remarks, Nico said an important thing when he spoke about communication, about the narrative. And as I fully agree with him, I think 2 things are important. Firstly, when the EU, when this construction is under attack, we as pro-Europeans, if the project is not perfect, we need to defend it, talk about its achievements, and see, how this can be improved. Is the EU perfect? Is it, are we done with the institutional construction? Of course not. Of course we need to improve it. Of course we have to reduce bureaucracy, cut red tape, and do many other things. So I believe that our fundamental duty there is not starting as well to throw stones at the project as Eurosceptics, as extremists do, but defend it and talk about it in light of its present and future raison d'etre. So, it was good 50 years ago for this and this reasons, but that will not convince the young people of today why Europe will still be good for them in the upcoming decades. But I believe our duty is to work on improving it and defend it, not on destroying it. And secondly, when we speak about reforms, and we have been speaking about reforms for 1 hour now, we have not yet in concrete terms said what we mean. And my take is the following. When you mention the notion of reforms, people are afraid in the sense, it's going to be something which will affect me at the end of the day. But as we become more concrete, are you as a citizen interested in, do you benefit from an efficient public administration? Oh, you do. Do people benefit from a reform of education system which corresponds to the needs of the labor market, in which you acquire those skills in university, in school, which you need to find a job? Well, of course, yes. And by the way, do we have the e-skills, digital skills, which we will need to do the jobs of the future? I mean, in 20, 30 years, there will be so many jobs on the market which do not even exist now, so many professions which do not even exist now. And I'm just saying a banal thing, because even now, the people at my age are performing jobs which did not exist 30 years ago. So it's clear that, we also need an education, a reform of the education systems, an alignment with the needs of the market. And how many excellent papers have I read, including from the Martin Center on, from reform to growth. But I believe that when we sell it, we should not only sell it as reform, need to reform. I believe we need to put the benefits of it in the center. Efficient public administration, liberalized markets, liberalized labor markets. Because as a young person, if a labor market is rigid, then the generation of our parents has a job, an indefinite contract, which also reduces their incentives to improve productivity to lifelong learning, while the young generation is still out the labor market, and although it might have good skills and it would deserve a stable job, it would just not get a chance. So when we talk about reforms, become more concrete and talk about the good things, the positive outcome of them for many categories of people at the end of the day.
Okay. More questions? I think we have here. Here.
Thanks very much. I'm Roland Freudenstein, Policy Director of the Martin Center. And yeah, Siegfried, let me come back right to you. Talk about reforms and the benefits. You picked education, for example. Now that's an easy one. You know, I think it's obvious to everyone that educational reform will benefit us, and our kids will, and so on. But you also said market liberalization, for example, cutting red tape. I mean, it's as simple as this. One person's cutting red tape is the other person's abolition of 150 years of achievements of workers and consumers. And, let's at least see that challenge. And look at, especially talking to young people, look at France at the moment. The evident inability of the French economy to reform itself, and especially convince young people that making it easier to fire is also making it easier to hire. And to abolish a two-tiered labor market is the only way forward. And yet the very people who would obviously, at least to you and me, and most of the people in this room, benefit from such reform are the staunchest opponents that are willing to actually smash up Paris at night in order to, push their, ludicrous ideas about economy and the future. And I don't have the solution for this. But we have to at least be aware that whatever smart communication techniques we use, we will not convince everyone of the reforms that are necessary in order to actually improve the economic situation. And here I'm coming back to Angelos. Of course, better performance of the European Union, and that includes the national governments, is not the silver bullet. There is no silver bullet against populism, but it would go a long way. An improvement of the economic situation, a return to sustainable growth, would go a long way to making times a bit harder for the populists on the left and the right. And there is still identity politics. There are non-economic questions that I'm afraid our political family has neglected for much too long. But it goes back to the first 2 points that Siegfried outlined in the beginning. You remember? It was less debt, or reducing debt, and it was increasing competitiveness. And I'm just saying that on those 2 points, you will never take the vast majority of people with you. I think at least in the southern half of the member states of the European Union. So I think to a certain extent, our governments will just have to do the reforms and then wait for the positive results to come in.
You want here? Sorry? You wanted to? Okay.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Joanna. I'm currently unemployed. That's why I'm able to be here and enjoy this really interesting conference. I have a few questions regarding, I arrived late, but you mentioned many solutions that you think, or many topics that you believe should be approached regarding, generally speaking, about the EU issue. And I was wondering if I can really quickly sum it up regarding everything that you said since I arrived. You mentioned redefining the EU decision-making process as something, so the way the structure, the way the institutions work with each other, and obviously the communication part, but that will come later. Then the first gentleman, which I believe is called Siegfried, he mentioned that in order for us for the economic framework to be developed or changed so the private sector can invest and think that it's interesting enough to invest on it? You mentioned that, so this is a competitiveness question, but I didn't understand, and if you please afterwards could tell me what you believe could be done, that would be really interesting. So how is the private sector supposed to, or how can we create the economic framework that will make the private sector believe that it makes sense to invest in the economy? And then it was mentioned also the fiscal reform that should be tackled. How then this gentleman that spoke before about the way the oil is being sold and now the shifting towards euros or gold. I believe I understood, but maybe you could explain me better. Yes, but my question would be, it's not actually a question. I believe that we're not seeing it right, because at least my generation is already thinking about renewable energies, you know. We have to somehow start thinking that oil is something that must belong to the past. Anyway, last question. So further points, last ones. Governance. Instead of governance, if we want a real government, are we going towards federalism? Are we even thinking about it? Or is that totally impossible? Question mark. Communication issues. Yes, obviously it's important. Communication, campaign and advocacy. Gathering again and making the public, the common EU citizens reconnect, if they ever were connected to our European democracy. That's really important, but first we need to decide what we want to do politically, and then how we're going to tackle the issue in terms of communication. So my question would be regarding all these topics that you mentioned that I believe are important. So EU decision-making process, economic framework so the private sector can invest, fiscal reform, I won't mention oil, governance towards federalism, communication. What is, in your opinion, now this is my question, what is, in your opinion, the main goal, target that's either the EPP or you personally believe should be the first main priorities? Thank you.
Okay, before your answers, I'd like to come back to this question. Sorry. No, okay, perfect.
It's a very simple one.
Okay, perfect. Then I leave my question.
So, my name is Masson. Only one question and communication around it. Is sustainable economical growth still possible for Europe as it was used to enjoy it? And if it's not possible in the same way, then European Commission and institution should communicate more about it.
Okay. Well, my only to add some to this question is that I'd like to know your opinion about, because it's something that we have debated in FAES. Do you think that the euro is ideologically neutral? You know what I mean? A lot of people feel that they are, well, okay, it seems that the euro has left very, very few room to leftist positions. Do you think that's true? That the euro is not ideologically neutral, you know? Okay, and this is because of the difficulties in order to implement reform and so on. Okay, you can answer.
Yeah. So with Roland, of course, I agree as so many times, and he's right. You know, when he says it will be difficult to make many of the reforms appealing to the people, and as he also is right when he says that should not prevent us from doing the reforms. It's true that there has been particular resilience to reforms in France, but then, you know, take the macroeconomic indicators of France and Germany of 20 years ago and of now, and you will see, you know, investments increasing, share of Germany in global trade increasing, so investments increasing in Germany, decreasing in France. Decreasing investments today means means a reduction in competitiveness. Tomorrow it means less demand for your products on global markets tomorrow. So I can only agree with Roland on the take that it's difficult. It's eventually difficult to convince all people, but of course it's needed. And when we speak about France, just take the economic indicators of France and Germany, and you will see that the country which made the reforms, and by the way, it was not only EPP governments in Germany which dared to do the reforms. The country which did the reforms is better off. On what do we do to create an attractive framework for the private sector to invest in? Firstly, limited debt, of course. Do not spend more of people's money than we can afford, because as an economic actor, if a country is indebted, you would know that this debt will need to be paid back tomorrow by an increased tax burden, by higher taxes in the future. It's not something which would make you increase. Banking sector, return the banking sector to its initial mission, which means financing the real economy, SMEs, entrepreneurship. Education, as I said before, link the education system to the needs of the market, make sure that young people learn in schools and universities what they need to acquire a job in the private sector. Invest in innovation, research, development, infrastructure. Infrastructure means, of course, highways, roads, airports, but also energy infrastructure, digital infrastructure, which is essential for private investments. Support for SMEs, for young entrepreneurs, a simple, predictable tax system, but also the full application of the rule of law. For me, as an enterprise, it's essential to know that if I invest in a country, in every corner of the EU, the law is obeyed, and if I respect the law, nothing bad can happen to me. But that competitor who eventually would move to unfair competition by not obeying the law, he would be punished according to the law. So the rule of law is essential in that sense. But also the budget, because the budget, too often when we speak about fiscal consolidation, about reforming the budgets, people are afraid that we're going to cut through all headings of the budget at national level. But to me, the budget needs to be at national level, and that's even more important than at European level, because at national level the budget is bigger in terms of volume. The budget should be a reflection of our political priorities. So budgets need to be reformed in the sense that we allocate the limited amount which we have into those areas which we believe are important, generate jobs, growth, as I said before, research, innovation, infrastructure. So the public budget needs to be, is also, in my eyes, a tool of reform, because you are spending the money which you have available for those areas which you think are important.
Okay, thank you, Siegfried. Do you want to say something? Or Angela?
Ronald, I want to answer to you by not answering to you. I think
I didn't ask you to.
no, but still, I think you mentioned a point that touches another important dimension of possible reforms, because the question how the burdens of making yourself more competitive are accepted by the people is very much dependent on the attitude of local political elites. And the question how to connect European political elites and local political elites is a very important one, because it basically means you need more Europeans from Brussels go out there fighting for the reforms, and you need more national elites fighting for European solutions. And it's part of the problem that we have now. And I'm not complaining now about the quality of elites. That's, I think, very cheap shot. But the institutional question is, if I see how German members of the European Parliament are communicating or not communicating with national members of Parliament, how amazingly low the links are between national policy making and European policy making here in Brussels, I think there is a very important area of improvement, because the paper from Reforms to Growth, who is there in the national elites of the member countries in the European Union actually fighting for the reforms and seen fighting for it? I think that's one of the key questions. And on the priorities that have been mentioned, the priorities for reform, I think, are dictated by the situation. We need to have an institutional answer to the asylum seekers. having more European integration on asylum and refugees and external border protection. There are some things happening already, but I think it's obvious that there needs to be a more institutional approach towards this. And the second is fiscal stability in the Eurozone, where the situation has dictated this already towards some reforms, but I think where, so I would see where more things need to happen, so I think those priorities are very much dictated by the situation.
Thank you. Nicholas?
Yeah. About Roland's comment about what's going on in Paris right now. I mean, I'm not sure I would rush to think that Parisian kids demonstrating against the establishment is a generalizable political phenomenon. And in any case, I'm not sure it's really helpful to generalize out of that. So there seems to me that there's the implicit assumption that if people are given more, and I may be wrong, maybe I'm just being presumptuous here, but there seems to be this assumption that if people are given the opportunity to voice their opinion before or when something is decided, they will instinctively be reactionary or conservative about it. And if only we just have time for whatever is decided to bear fruits, then people will actually see that the system performs well, and therefore they will be happy with it. Now, I'm not sure whether over the last 6 years, our experience of over the last 6 years shows that, and in parliamentary democracies usually, I cannot think of any parliamentary democracy that has parliaments sitting for 7 years or something. I know Mexico has 6. Maybe European countries should start having 8-year parliaments so that maybe reforms will bear results in one term. I'm not sure this is the way to go. There's a clear question of political timing. I think it's part of the game. It's part of the deal. I don't think we should nag about it. If economic reforms have to be done, some people are going to be unhappy about it. It's a challenge that has to be taken up, but I think we also have to be strategic about what these people are saying and how we can go about it, satisfying some of their demands while also making what is necessary to happen, which is economic reforms. On the question of youth, what I find interesting is that in the upcoming British referendum, the most pro-European constituency is actually the youth. It's actually the young people, which is a complete reversal of what happens in most countries in the continent. I don't know why this happens. I'm not an expert in British politics, but I think my suspicion might be that in a country where Euroscepticism is so widespread and is seen as part of is a more of an established phenomenon than what it is in Europe, Europe actually appears appealing to many young people. It's rebellious. It's rebellious. So maybe we should try to be rebellious as well if we want to sell Europe. Maybe that might be a solution. And I would like to close actually your question about where is the political space. I found an interesting. There's this famous piece on The Atlantic about Barack Obama and his foreign policy. And I'm veering off a bit, but I'll get to the point. And what is interesting was that he basically, his idea was he didn't bomb Syria and he didn't do all of this because he just didn't think much of the establishment of Washington with all its think tanks and all the ways that they were planning up things going on in the Middle East. Think tanks are part of the establishment. It's not only politicians, it's not only journalists. Think tanks are part of the establishment. People don't even want to take vaccines anymore, don't even want to vaccinate their children. Doctors are becoming part of the establishment, right? We are part, opinion makers, thought makers, academics are part of the establishment. And I think think tanks, such as the one Fayez or the Martin Center, there is a political space where we can think more populist in a smart way in order for others later on to act populist in measured terms in a smart way as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we are just finishing, but I'd like to put a last question on the table. about Spain. Sorry, I'd like to know your experience, your German experience, Greece experience, and obviously, Siegfried, your experience. We are now, as you know, traversing in Spain a very tricky political situation. The parliament, the Spanish parliament, has fragmented a lot, and it's impossible, or it has been impossible to create a new government. What do you think about creating big coalitions in order to defend from populism? Is that a good idea? What I mean is that it's a good idea to give populist parties the category of opposition leaders and so on, in order to send the message to citizens that there are only two positions, the system and the anti-system party. So what do you think about that? Because now in Spain, it's very important, no? Because I think we are going through a coalition, a big coalition. Siegfried, if you want, and then Nico and Angelo.
I will tell you what I think. I think it's a very bad idea, and I will tell you why. Because until now, the big political battle in Europe has been left or right, you know. Sometimes we lost elections, sometimes we won elections, and you know, when we won them, the left was in opposition, and when we lost them, the center-left was in government. While if we do a grand coalition of the center-right and of the center-left, then I believe that in the medium-longer term, the battle will move from left to right to, you know, establishment against populists. And sometimes we're going to win it, but sometimes we might, in those circumstances, even lose it, and you might have the situation which we had, for example, in some, but of course, Nico is much better placed than me to discuss about this, like we had it in some German regions now, that the two major political forces, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats together, are not able to form a majority. So if you have a grand coalition, basically, of the two greatest parties, it's very unlikely that by the end of a government period, be it 4 years, 5 years period, it's very unlikely that people would be to an extent of 70-80% satisfied with the work of the government and vote those two parties with an extent of 70-80%. Look, for example, Germany, Grand Coalition for the first time 2005. Well, of course, it was before in the 60s as well, but 2005, the two parties entered together into the Grand Coalition with 70% of the votes, if I'm not wrong, Nico, and they exited together with the 60% of the votes. The Christian Democrats managed to preserve their electorate. The Social Democrats took a hit of 10%. Also Austria. I mean, we've been having now grand coalitions for some time, and we are at the point where the People's Party and the Social Democrats hardly make it above 50% together. So I believe, you know, making this a rule, making a grand coalition a rule, would move the debate from center-right against center-left to establishment against the radicals, against the anti-system parties, and at some point, you know, we will be, the moderates will be at 50%, and you know, it might even happen that together we are below 50% and incapable to govern, and at some point we might even lose that debate against them.
Thank you. Nico? Sorry. Well, the question is, it's a good idea to create big coalition in order to, you know, defend from populism. This is on the long term.
I think what we are seeing in the party systems, not only in Spain but all over Europe, is a development where many trends are coming together. One of the trends is that obviously, and I mean, I start with us as center-right parties. Obviously, we as center-right parties are not able to reach out to the realities of life of large stratas in our own societies anymore. It's a question posed to center-right parties that we see there. And it's not fair to just relate this to external factors and say, oh, the EU or whatever happened, and that's why we are losing elections. I think it's a question for the parties how to modernize themselves. And to be just one more point on this, it's not very logical that political parties in general and center-right political parties in special are offering the same, and now I'm a little bit with you even, on participation are offering the same forms of expressing your political interests and political participation like they did in the 50s or 60s. The communication and participation demands have been changing, and the political parties have not reflected on this yet. So I would see in Spain the result for our partners of the Partido Popular. I would, as one factor, also see as a reflection on the Partido Popular having missed their own modernization. Which was true, by the way, also for the ÖVP, which is true for certainly true for the CDU in Baden-Württemberg a few weeks ago. So it's a common problem that we have. The second factor, of course, is that in individualistic societies, in very pluralist Western societies, a fragmentation of the political landscape is even likely. So maybe we have to get used to it, that new parties are coming and going, and that there are more people playing, and that unconventional coalitions have to be formed. And I agree very much with you, Siegfried, that we are moving away from the left and right dimension of political parties. If it's true what I said before, that for most of the people in the European Union, output legitimacy became more important. They don't care very much about left and right. They don't care about their problems being solved. But the tendency we have seen is with the new parties that we more and more have a dichotomy between liberal and illiberal parties. With parties that have a very different approach towards parliamentary democracy, and who are changing the discourse into a discourse where compromises are less likely to happen. I think this is the most important danger, which could be turned into an argument against your argument, because it would mean let's have an organization of political discourses in our countries where we force the populists or the new parties to make compromises. Because if we support this dividing line between those types of parties, we might fragment even further and not be able to bridge the gaps in the future. Which does not set us free from the question how we as a European People's Party have a better understanding of the life realities of younger people, of female people, of people with a migration background, where traditionally we as Christian Democrats, conservatives, have problems in reaching out to them.
Okay.
Yeah, just one final follow, because I imagine we need to wrap up. It depends what the political and the party system is. Obviously, having grand coalitions all the time, as you do in Austria, it's problematic. But where grand coalitions are part of the logic of the game, they can happen. Germany, Austria, Netherlands, parts of Belgium, and so on. In political systems that have been built for many years on an idea that there is a clear-cut either-or option, UK, Spain, France, the effects of what you might think would be the effects of a grand coalition, strengthening of the extremes or the fringes, would be even stronger. So I think in the case of Spain, a grand coalition is a pretty. I would risk another election before going into a grand coalition, to be honest. And for something else specific about Spain, which also applies to the UK. I don't know if there are any British people here. If you want to stoke or mess up with regional identities in order to present yourself as guarantor of national unity, you better be ready to deliver on some of the demands of those regional identities. Because regional identities today are not simply regional identities, but they're touchstones for populism as well. The SNP in the UK, the Scottish National Party, is more of an anti-Westminster party. It became powerful, it came to rule Scotland when it became an anti-Westminster party from just being a Scottish national party. Okay. So if you want to, all I'm saying, you get the drift. So
no, that's perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, no, I think we have to close the story, but you can ask the panelists whatever you want at the end of the talk. Thank you very much. We have to close this session because there is another one at 11:30. Okay. Thank you very much for being here. I expect that the roundtable is so interesting as it has been for me. Thank you very much for you. We see you next. Thank you.